Okay, so what we're going to do today is recreate the ball blast game, but instead of using 5 separate ball objects, we're going to use an array of ball objects. Okay, and then we'll use loops to draw them and actually create them. So the first step that we're going to take here is wherever you have your ball class, uh, you can either do the project that we're that or do the class that we're working on today in that same project, or if you want to move and do stuff in arrays and loops in that project, copy ball and my world into that project. So we're gonna go ahead. I'm gonna do that right now. So select ball and my world, copy, and then inside of arrays and loops, if you have that project, just paste it in there. So now I have ball and my world in there, and so I'm gonna create a new class, and I'm gonna call it ball blast with array, or
I had already copied my world over because I was using colors.
yeah. Okay, so we want my world to be the superclass, and we want a main method in there. And so when we finish that, we should have something that looks like that. Right away, I'm just going to go into the main method and put in here that I want a new ball blast with array. So the next thing we're going to do here is inside of this ball blast with array class, we're going to make the array of ball objects that we're going to use throughout. Okay, so I want you to kind of understand what we're talking about here. What I'm trying to do, okay, is basically recreate this ball blast game, but using an array instead of using the 5 different ball objects that we have here. So this that I'm programming up here is going to replace what I have there. So I'm going to go private ball array, and I'm just going to call it ball array, and then say that it's a new ball array with 5 elements. Okay, so we're saying the word ball array quite a bit. So let me just put in some notes here. When we create a ball, an array like this one, we get kind of placeholders for 5 ball objects, okay? But each element is null. All right, and so we're going to have to create those elements. The elements are indexed 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? So the indexes of an array always start with 0. So we have index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can say ball array 0, ball array 1, ball array 2, etc. Okay? Each element, I guess, needs to be what we call instantiated. Okay? Which means made into a new object. All right. So down here in the original ball blast game, we had ball 0 draw, ball 1 dot draw, all the way down to ball 4 dot draw. We could do something similar to that in our draw method up here. All right. But I want you to kind of think about what we're going to do in here. So I don't necessarily want you to copy this down yet. Okay, so we could do something like ball array at 0 dot draw. Okay, and then we could just copy and paste this and say we want the same thing to happen for ball 0 through 4. Okay, we want all 5 of those balls to draw. And so that's what, that would be okay. But I want you to imagine, like, what if there were 100 balls? Would we want to copy and paste that like that 100 times? 5 times isn't too bad. What if there were 20? I probably still wouldn't want to copy and paste it, right? I want to kind of have some other way of doing this.
Create the while loop so it's all array of index thing.
Exactly. So instead of doing it this way, we want to use a loop to just loop through all of the balls and tell every one of them to draw. Okay? So we don't want to do this. Instead, we want to kind of go through and say, well, we want a while loop that's going to tell each ball to draw, right? And so we're going to do something like that. So what is a good name for this value, this thing that's going to be a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4? What's a good name for that? It's a good name. Index is a good name, okay? So we can do something like, say, we want the ball array at index to draw, and that means that we have to kind of fill in the other parts that go with this while loop, right? So the while loop, we're going to say, has an int variable that's going to be its counter for index, okay, called index. And what's the first value of index that I want to use? 0, okay? So counter for loop, okay? Then here we're saying take the ball array at that index at 0 initially and draw it, okay? What do I want to do with index after I draw that ball? Add 1 to it, so I want to increase index. I want to make index equal to whatever it was before plus 1. So that's changing the counter variable. And then in here, I need to put a condition to say when we should continue to do this draw and this index equals index plus 1. So we said that we want that to work for index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So what's true about all of those values? Less than or equal to 4. Okay, so we could say index less than or equal to 4.
It would be, since we were making it so that no matter what the size is, so it could be when index is less than or equal to the ball array dot length, was it before?
Yeah, good. Okay, so that's exactly what we want to start thinking about. Okay, so another way of writing index less than 4 would be index less than or equal to 4 would be index less than 5. Does that make sense? It's basically the same logic. But what we want to start moving toward is saying, like, well, I don't really want that 5 there because really this number here depends on how many balls I have. Okay? And the number of balls that I have is ball array dot length. Okay? Making that change, making this change to ball array dot length here means that if I wanted to later on, I could say, oh, okay, well, now I want 10 balls in my game. And then I wouldn't have to change this to 10 because I have it just set to the length, okay? So using dot length basically makes this program more adaptable, I guess. All right. So this is a pretty critical moment right here, okay, that you understand what this loop is trying to do. So the question was, why do we use less than array.length, okay, versus what, like less than or equal to? Okay, so remember that the length of this array is 5, okay? The elements of the array are indexed starting with 0. So the indexes are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So all of the indexes are going to be less than the length. Okay? So hopefully you're looking at this and you're like, yeah, this basically does the same thing that we did down here. It's just now we're using an array. And I guess the benefit, it doesn't look like I really saved a lot of space, but the benefit of understanding this is, like I said before, like let's say that there were 100 balls, right? I wouldn't want to keep on copying and pasting this 100 times when I could just write the exact same thing here, and it's gonna do all 100 of them. Okay? So that's the idea. Okay, if we go ahead and run this right now, we're going to get an error. And so let me just kind of talk about that error real quick. All right? So here's what the program looks like. It doesn't draw any balls, and instead of what it does is it gives us this error that's a null pointer exception. Okay? So let's talk about that. Well, okay. So when we create an array this way, it gives us 5 placeholders, or it gives us 5 elements, but each of those elements is null. All right? And so when I go to ball array at 0 and I tell it to draw, it's basically saying take null and draw it. Okay? And so the example that I always give to, the class, I just think it's easy to understand this, is like if you have a bunch of papers in front of you, go ahead and staple it right now. Can you take those papers and staple them right now, Nasser? Yeah. Can you staple that together? Why not? You don't have a stapler. Okay? So that's what we call a null pointer exception, right? It's like, I know that if I had a stapler, I could do the action of stapling, but I don't have a stapler, so I can't staple. Does that make sense? That's called a null pointer exception. In this case, we're saying every ball that we create should be able to draw, right? However, we have not created the ball at this index yet, so we can't tell it to draw. Okay? So you should have that concept in mind. In other words, what we need to do for each of these balls in this array is we need to make it a new ball. Okay? The way that we do that in a program like this one is we put that code in the constructor of this class. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So in between where we declared the ball array and the draw method, we're going to go ahead and put in public, and this thing is called ball blast with array. And inside of there, we want to basically do the same thing that we just got done doing in draw. Okay? We want to write basically another loop that loops through all of the different ball elements and creates them. Okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna copy this while loop that we did down there and paste it up here. Okay? And I don't want to draw each of these things, right? Instead, what I want to do is make it into a new ball object. Okay? So each of these lines down here says that I'm going to make a new ball. This X value looks like it's changing. The Y value looks like it's not changing. The size is not changing. The color is changing, but maybe the color doesn't have to change. Like this is green and so is this. Okay, so let's go ahead and put in, I'm just going to put in a little underscore there to say that we got to put something in there for X. The Y value is not changing. The size is not changing. And I'm just going to make all of these red. So let's just space that out a little bit so it's a little bit easier to look at there. Okay. So hopefully you're looking at this and you're thinking to yourself like, oh, well, I want that to be 0 when index is 0, 100, then 200, then 300, then 400. Okay? So who has a suggestion for what I can put in place there? Yeah.
So we have to create another variable for
Okay.
the X placeholder.
Okay.
And it starts off with the value of 0.
Okay, so create another variable. Let's call it X because it's going to be in the X position, right? You said it starts out at 0. All right.
And then we should create inside the loop that so we replace the underscores with X, and then at the bottom of the loop, or under the index part, we do the X is equal to X plus 100.
Okay, good. So right here, we're going to use X now. And then somewhere in here, it could be after the index equals index plus 1, but I like to have it here. We're going to make X equal to whatever it was before plus 100. Okay? So if we do that, and I'll get to you in a second, okay? If we do that, we should be able to run this now, and this constructor is getting called when we run the program, all right? And then it's going to loop through, create all the balls, and then go ahead and draw them. So you should be able to run this and have it look like that. Okay? Nasir, what was your question? Yep, that was going to be my next point. Okay? So there's no problem with using X the way that we're using X right there. And it's perfectly fine. But you could get away without using X at all. Okay, so I just want to show you that right now. All right. If we get rid of that X variable, there's another way to get this to be 0, then 100, then 200, then 300, then 400. And let's kind of think about this for a second. So when index is 0, we want this to be 0. When index is 1, we want this to be 100. Index is 2, 200. 3, 300, 4, 400. So how can I get the values that I want here just using index or something with index? Okay.
It works out because index 0 times 100 is still 0. Then index becomes 1 because 1 times 100 becomes 1. It keeps doing that.
Okay, so we could replace it with this expression. If you like having X there, go ahead and keep it. Like, that's totally fine with me. But if you're, for me, I kind of like to use as few variables as possible with still making my code make sense. And so using index times 100, I think, is a little bit nicer for me. Okay? All right. I will come around and try to help you guys figure out whatever problems you're having. What I would like you to do, and we don't have a whole lot of time left, but what I would like you to do is start at least thinking about how you're going to do mouse clicked now that we have this array of ball objects instead of individual ball objects. Okay?